First of all, for those of you who are not familiar with velocity, velocity as a term in the agile space is defined as the rate of completion of work, right? Sometimes you can measure the rate of completion of work in terms of the amount of time you spent on it. Sometimes it's some sort of a measure of complexity. So story points often come up as a concept to measure complexity, volume of work, uncertainty. There is a lot of confusion about story points. And in my experience, I've noticed most people out there don't have a clear understanding of story points, at least in my experience, and that leads them to do a loosey-goosey approach of story points. So here is my 60 seconds tactical tip for using story points, right? As a team, look at your entire backlog, pick one item from your entire backlog that everybody agrees represents the most standard piece of work you will ever do. Not the easiest, not the most difficult, but the most standard piece of work, right? So get everybody to agree on that. That essentially is your anchor. Now that anchor should be given a story point, which means let's say you give that anchor as a 5. Now, when you do refinement, all you have to do is as you go story by story or requirement by requirement, every time you look at a new requirement, the question that the product owner needs to ask the team or the team needs to ask themselves is this new story more complex, larger, or less complex, smaller, and easier to do than that 5? If it is smaller than that 5, give it a 3. If it is more difficult than the 5, give it an 8. And so what you're doing is you're just oscillating between these 3 numbers, 3, 5, and 8. Anything that's lesser than the standard is interpretation of how complex they think something is. So if you say something is a 1, that means it's very easy for you. If you say something is 100, it means it's very difficult for you. A lot of times when you use story points, you will see teams use these non-linear sequences like Fibonacci sequences. I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the famous Italian mathematician Fibonacci, right? Built this non-linear sequence where the third number is the summation of the first 2 numbers. The reason why we recommend you use non-linear sequences is because when you compare a non-linear sequence to a linear sequence, you will notice that in a linear sequence, over a long enough timeline, most numbers will become multiples or divisibles of each other, except for one kind of numbers, which is prime numbers. They only have 2 factors, right? In a non-linear sequence, you don't have any such pattern. So human beings essentially are obsessed with matching patterns. We are pattern matching organism, anthropologically speaking, if you think about it. We look at most things we have done over the last 13,000 years of human civilization, Big Bang theory, evolution, carbon dating systems, archaeology, it's all based on pattern matching. So we are obsessed with matching patterns. That's why we are comfortable in linear sequences. But in the complex world that we all live in, 2 tasks will not be replicas of each other or multiples or divisibles of each other. So the non-linear sequence just creates a bit of a gap, and it tells you go after relative accuracy as opposed to absolute precision. So pick a standard piece of work, give it a 5. Anything that's more difficult is an 8 or a 10. Anything that's less difficult is a 3 or a 1. And just keep the numbers small. That's all you got to do. 1 story point equal to 1 day of work, 2 story points equal to 2 days of work. Don't do that. Here's why. Never convert points to time, right? It's a tendency that a lot of teams that are brand new to agile form of estimation will do. Here's the downside of doing it. The whole idea of using points is you admitting that I'm not good at estimation. So I don't know exactly how long this will take me to do. That's why I'm taking it at a higher level and saying this is about 5 to 6 days of work. And I'm calling that a 5-pointer. If you're converting points to time, then you will never be able to measure points over time. And your whole idea of using points is to get a measure of how many points you can do over time. Because if you're converting points to time, then think about what your graph of points over time looks like. It's time over time, which makes no sense, right? So you never convert points to time. Besides, if you have already reached a mathematical calculation where you can convert points to time, and that is precise for you and it's working, you already won the game. Don't use points anymore, use time. You already know exactly how long it takes you to do something. You only use points when you don't know how long it will take you to do it. So points will help you get more accurate, not precise. Time is precise, right? So don't convert points to time is the idea, I guess. If they're getting really good at converting points to time, let go of points. Why use points at all? Just use time. Story points are a thing that people have created in Agile. If you're doing Scrum, you're under no obligation to use points. Like in Scrum, there is no mention of story points. It's an Agile concept. In Kanban, there is no mention of using story points. It's an Agile concept. Somebody made it up. It's like the stock market. It runs on emotions, right? So if the story points are running on emotions, then if you are getting good at estimating in terms of time, just do time. Forget about points. I'm not a big fan of story points either, but if you're going to use points, then don't convert it to time, right?